have a very special guest and a good friend of mine, J. Christian Adams, former Department of Justice lawyer who became a whistleblower on all of the things that were going wrong at the Office of Civil Rights. And he also wrote a book on his experiences there, Injustice, Exposing the Radical Agenda of the Obama Justice Department, and rarely has a book had a thesis that was so borne out by events that followed its publication. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
Well, Eric Holder, your old boss at the Department of Justice, has been a lot in the news this week and last week and the week before that, and Hillary Clinton has been in the news. It seems to me that the Department of Justice is almost like a runaway train right now. Everybody's figured out it's out of control, but no one in the caboose wants to stop. No one in the engine room wants to stop it, and they seem to be just going faster and faster to try to subvert the justice system in this country. How do you see Eric Holder and what he's doing specifically in the areas you pay most attention to, which is voting rights and civil rights?
Well, he's doing exactly what President Obama promised in the 2008 campaign to anybody who was listening, and that was fundamentally transform America. And the Justice Department is the part of the government that probably has more power, other than the Defense Department, of course, but that's a whole different story, that has more power than any other federal agency. And they're using it to transform America across the board to a really radicalized agenda, whether it involves voting, whether it involves civil rights, mortgage lending, you name it. They're using the Justice Department as a left-wing radicalization tool.
Well, Tom Perez, who was head of the Office of Civil Rights for part of the time that you were there, he recently got a promotion. He's now the Secretary of Labor. The Republican attempt to derail his nomination failed. What was Tom Perez's agenda, and what were his greatest hits, so to speak, at the Office of Civil Rights when he was there at the Justice Department?
Yeah, well, Tom Perez, this is a great point you bring up. When Perez was head of the Civil Rights Division, he was really the guy on the ground responsible for this radical agenda, whether it was attacking voter ID laws in Texas and South Carolina, or whether it was forcing the New York City Fire Department to actually hire people who flunked the test, the entrance exams, simply because these people were black. They still had to hire them because of their skin color. Perez was the guy who really implemented all of this. And, you know, there was a lot of controversy over all of these programs. We don't even have time to list them all. Enormous controversy. But to show you what Obama really thinks, he promoted him to Labor Secretary.
Well, one of the programs that Perez was very much involved in was federal efforts to try to force local communities to build public housing or to restructure their housing programs. What was his role in that, and what do those programs try to do?
Yeah, this is part of this effort to move, if you will, resources from the have to the have-nots. It's a storyline many decades old. And what Perez was doing was leveraging the power of the Justice Department to force jurisdictions to develop more Section 8 housing, to shake down landlords who refuse to take Section 8 vouchers, to shake down banks who refuse to lend to people, for example, that didn't have very good credit.
Isn't this what happened during the housing bubble and the Community Reinvestment Act scandal under Clinton and Bush that got us into the financial mess we're in part, and we're still doing it?
Well, we're still doing it. Tom Perez and Obama and Holder, this is part of their main agenda on housing, and that is to force what they call community banks to loan money to places that shouldn't be getting money. But it doesn't matter to them because they see people who can't get mortgage loans that have bad credit as victims of the system, not as people who made bad choices.
You know, I spent several years observing the Justice Department during the Bush administration, and certainly there were a lot of mistakes made. I think, Alberto Gonzales, the Attorney General during the second half of the Bush years, shall we say, was deficient in many respects. And I noticed, of course, there was a scandal that seemed to consume him regarding the firing of U.S. attorneys, something that presidents have done from time immemorial. Bill Clinton fired every U.S. attorney the first day he was on the job as president. Bush removed a few U.S. attorneys because they didn't seem to go along with his law enforcement priorities, and somehow that became a big scandal. Now, Eric Holder seems to have scandals in every pot and every cupboard and every cubbyhole of the Justice Department. You've written the best-selling book, Regnery book, Injustice. What have you noticed about the media reaction to all of the Eric Holder scandals, and how does that contrast with what the media was doing during the Bush years?
Well, obviously, there's no difference between how the two different administrations have been treated. And what you see are the left-wing media, the blogosphere, if you will, Salon, HuffPost, and so forth, will always rush to defend Holder because, don't forget, he's a progressive soldier. He's the guy who's helping fundamentally transform America. And what happens is that then the Washington Post doesn't get involved in laying a finger on Holder. And these are the only people that the folks in the Justice Department care about. They worry about the New York Times editorial page, the Washington Post, and the left-wing blogosphere. And if they aren't criticizing Eric Holder is going to keep doing what he's doing.
Wow. Well, Eric Holder, though, was the first Attorney General in my memory who was actually censured by the House of Representatives. That didn't seem to make any impression. That was over the Fast and Furious scandal, the gun running scandal. Maybe you could explain a little bit of how that led to his censure.
Well, it's because Eric Holder didn't tell the truth in front of Congress and refused to turn over documents. And it went like this. The Justice Department had a program to flood Mexico with guns, purchased guns in the United States, and they flooded Mexico. Now, a lot of people say it's because they wanted to then argue that gun sales should be curtailed if nobody knew where the guns were coming from. So, when this scandal broke, Congress wanted documents. Congress wanted to know when Eric Holder knew about the program. And Eric Holder didn't tell the truth to Congress. He said, I learned about it just a couple of weeks ago, but we know that's not true. It was a long, long time before that. And they wouldn't turn over documents. So he was found in contempt of Congress. Contempt. But the most the devastating thing about it, John, is his reaction to it. Holder doesn't take it seriously. Whenever he's in front of Darrell Issa, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, he treats Issa with contempt. He says terrible things about Congress. This is a guy who simply does not believe he has done anything wrong.
Well, you seem to have exposed a fundamental problem in our system of government, which is if we have law enforcement officials, cabinet rank members, who simply ignore the law, they follow the rule of men rather than the rule of law, our system can't really take that strain very easily because Congress, if it subpoenas the Attorney General, if it basically holds him in contempt, who enforces that? In other words, to paraphrase Joseph Stalin, can Congress do anything? How many divisions does it really have?
Well, that's right. And here you're, of course, referring to the Pope, and that's perhaps an apt analogy because it really takes, to hold someone to account who's this lawless, you have to reach down deep into the Constitution and find things the founders put there, like the power of the purse. The power of the purse is the power of the House to defund people, to simply not give them any more money. But it's something that this Republican House leadership has been reluctant to use. Senator Mike Lee of Utah has called on the House to use the power of the purse to end Obamacare. But if they won't use the power of the purse to end something that's wildly unpopular, it's hard for me to believe they'll use the power of the purse to fight back against Holder.
Well, specifically, if you could wave your magic legislative wand, how would you deal with the rogue Justice Department? What uses would you make of the power of the purse to try to rein them in?
Great question. It's so simple to do. You talk to Chairman Frank Wolf on the House Appropriations Committee, who's in charge of justice, and you list 10 units of justice that are causing the most mischief, whether it's ATF, whether it's the Civil Rights Division, who's always asking for more money, whether it's whatever agency in the department, and you simply line item them out, and you say, okay, this group of 50 mischief makers are no longer going to get government salaries, and or we're going to close down this tiny little operation that's causing problems. It's very simple to do. Americans would love it if Congress actually flexed its muscle and did something about Eric Holder's corruption.
Well, as we know, Congress's muscles have atrophied for many years. Not only have they ignored government scandals, but look at all the power they've surrendered to independent regulatory agencies that basically rule our lives far more than Congress ever had. They have independent power, independent authority, independent budgets. So the problem here seems to me that you don't really have, the policemen seem to be asleep or seem to have been co-opted. The media doesn't hold Eric Holder to account. Congress seems to be floundering about. They did pass a contempt resolution in the House against Eric Holder, but they can't enforce it because it has to be enforced by the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, and he works for Eric Holder. So given all of that, though, is there seem to be signs, though, that with the NSA eavesdropping, with the IRS scandal, that doesn't directly involve Eric Holder, but peripherally he seems to show no interest in investigating matters. Do you think this can go on for the entire second term of the Obama administration, or do you think there will be a reckoning and accounting?
Yeah, unfortunately, I actually think it can go on. I have seen very little inclination from leadership to do anything really effective against Holder. But more importantly, John, and this is something that I think we've talked about, is I don't think Republicans quite understand what they're up against with people like Holder and his minions. They're facing a sort of Democrat, energized, activist, progressive Democrat that they've never seen before. This is the radicals of the 60s now sitting in the corner offices.
The Saul Alinsky acolytes.
Yeah, and they don't understand it. They think it's 1994 and the rules still apply, but it doesn't. And Holder is a great representation of that. All of the inability to catch this guy and make him accountable is a symptom of what I'm talking about. This is a different breed of radical Democrats in power.
Well, last question for you is how Eric Holder has managed to derail or deflect attempts to pursue voter integrity, to cut down on voter fraud in America. Now, the Supreme Court recently said the states that have been covered for 50-odd years under the Voting Rights Act, they could not specifically be targeted for pre-clearance provisions. They didn't have to go mother may I to the Justice Department for every change that they made in an election law. And Holder seems to have ignored that. And what is he doing to the state of Texas to try to subvert their voter ID law, for example?
Yeah, the Supreme Court said Texas shouldn't have to get approval in Washington for every election law. And Eric Holder has gotten involved in a lawsuit there to bring them back under federal control. And this just shows you these people know how to use power. For a couple of days after Holder attempted to bring Texas back under federal control, Republicans were shocked by it. And that gets to my point. You've got to get past the shock, because this guy is a different breed. He knows how to use power. He wants Texas back under federal control. He may do the same to other states, South Carolina maybe, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. All of these are places that the people in the Justice Department have a deep cultural dislike of and would like to see them under federal control.
Last point, what has happened in Louisiana? What has the Justice Department done to Louisiana's Secretary of State?
Yeah, this is amazing. Eric Holder, in an effort to get more welfare recipients on the voter rolls, actually sent Civil Rights Division people into their welfare offices wearing wires with electronic surveillance and recording equipment to see if Louisiana state officials were pushing voter registration on these phony, disguised Justice Department officials disguised as welfare recipients. When not enough of them got voter registration forms pushed in their face, the Justice Department sued Louisiana under motor voter. It's an outrageous behavior that the Secretary of State of Louisiana called Gestapo tactics.
Well, I'm glad to see that the limited enforcement and prosecutorial powers of the Justice Department are being spent so wisely and so efficiently. After all, we don't have any other problems to worry about, do we?
And avert your eyes from the IRS officials who leaked internal tax applications to ProPublica. That's a felony, but there's no prosecutions there.
Well, Christian, I urge people to get your book, Injustice, which you can get in good bookstores and on Amazon. And thank you so much for being with us. We'll have you back.
Thanks, John. Take care.
Thanks. This is John Funn sitting in for